Dave Talks Comics, Episode 93, Knights of Sidonia, Season 1, Episodes 1 through 6. Welcome to Dave Talks Comics, a program on the subjects of comic books and cartoons. I, Dave, talk about the comic books I have read and cartoons I have watched. I talk from my notes. I don't go panel by panel or scene by scene, or at least I try not to. And I try to do more than just summarize the stories. This program is definitely not spoiler-free. I try not to spoil everything, but in the process of talking about these comic books and cartoons, I will probably spoil them in some way. I'm sure I'm going to spoil them in some way on this episode. So on this episode, I'm going to be talking about the first 6 episodes of Knights of Sidonia, which was originally a manga, but I'm talking about the anime series, which is available on Netflix. And I think there's a little more summary in this episode than I like there to be, but I think it's justified because, first off, there's just so much going on happening so fast. And secondly, it's part of the magic of this show is the way in which it all comes together. And so I can't recreate all of that. And so what you get from listening to me talk about this show doesn't compare to the actual experience of watching the show, the animation, the voice acting, and just the pacing of the show, the way it all comes together. I've been wanting to talk about Knights of Sidonia for a while now. I originally watched the anime series, the first season of the anime series, in late 2014. Roughly 9 months ago, and honestly, it was a little confusing. It was a little hard to follow. There's a lot going on in this series, and they recently released the second season, and I decided to go back and rewatch the first season before I watched the second season. Now, these seasons are only 12 episodes each. And honestly, I found it a lot easier to follow the second time around, knowing who all the characters were, knowing what all the relationships were. I was picked up on things that I hadn't seen before. The first thing I should say about this is this was originally, like a lot of anime series, but not all, this was originally a manga, a comic book, and it was adapted into an anime series. I have not read the manga. I've considered reading the manga, but I'm really enjoying the cartoon, the anime, and so I just haven't bothered with the manga. Like I said, it's been much easier to follow the series the second time around. And in preparing to record this, honestly, when I found myself writing out my notes, I had to really stop and think about this quite a bit, because what I found myself doing is just summarizing the episodes. And I really want to do more than just summarize the episodes. I want to provide some insight. And I think the way to look at this series is through the main character, whose name is Nagate Tanakaze. And he is a pilot, although he lives on this world called Sidonia, which is basically a spaceship. And he lived in seclusion for the early part of his life. I believe he's supposed to be in his late teens at the point the story begins. And he had lived with his grandfather in the bowels of this spaceship, hidden inside this enormous spaceship. And nobody knew exactly where they were. And obviously years had passed. And then he emerges because his grandfather has passed away, and he's run out of food. And he had what he had done. He and his grandfather had done is his grandfather had trained him to be a pilot, to pilot one of these giant mecha, giant robot fighting machines. And I guess the other thing you should know about Sidonia, and this is one of the interesting things about this series, is that Sidonia, the Knights of Sidonia, is that the way the story kind of unfolds. And like I said, I found it very hard to follow at first. I like the animation, I think, is beautiful, and I was intrigued by the characters, I was intrigued by the story, but it was really hard to follow at first. And it wasn't until I watched it the second time through that I really started to see, oh, okay, I see what's going on here. And now, part of that may be because I'm watching this in Japanese with English subtitles, which is the way I prefer to watch anime. I've never really been very fond of the English voices that they use when they dub these animes. There's just something about them that just sounds like it's talking to a younger audience, and it just doesn't. I haven't given this one a try, dubbed, but it just doesn't work for me. It just always, there's something in the tone of the voices that just isn't that impressive. I mean, honestly, something like Justice League and Justice League Unlimited were much better done than most of the anime almost any of the anime that I've listened to dubbed, but once again, that's not very much. So, the thing you should know about Sidonia, this world that they live on, which is this giant spaceship, which kind of has it's like a spaceship, but there's also this huge chunk of rock, so it's like the spaceship was built into an asteroid, but the ship part of the asteroid is much bigger than the asteroid itself. And so they have these giant robot fighters, and let me get back to what you really should know, is that this is like the remnants of humanity. That what you learn in the course of this series is that the Earth was destroyed hundreds of years before the series begins by these giant space creatures called Gaunas. And so Tanikaze has trained to be a pilot, was trained by his grandfather to be a pilot. Although the Gaunas, they haven't been sighted for over 100 years at this point. And for the most part, this series is kind of about the hero's journey. It's about Tanikaze's efforts. You know, he turns out that he is an excellent pilot thanks to his training by his grandfather. But at the same time, his grandfather trained him on an older model of these fighting machines than is currently used. He was trained on the Model 17. The Model 18 is what's currently used. Although there are still, I don't know if it's just one. I think it may just be one of the old model that is still around, because he's actually given that one to pilot. And through the course of the series, you'll see there's some differences. So in the first episode, he emerges from within the bowels of the ship. He tries to steal some food. He gets caught. He is badly injured, but he seems to heal very quickly. And then instead of punishing him, the nominal captain, the nominal leader of Sidonia, Captain Kobayashi, instead makes him a cadet pilot. And within the first series, within the first episode, he goes from attempting to steal food to being injured to becoming a pilot to going on his first training mission in one of these actual giant robot fighters, along with 3 other people in this squad. And then the first episode ends with them encountering the first Gauna that's been seen in 100 years, and this is Gauna 487. And one of the reasons why this story is a little hard to follow if you're watching it in Japanese with the English subtitles, is that there's a lot flashing up on the screen. Because you will see readouts, and there'll be translations of the readouts as well as translations of the dialogue. And one thing that I found was that in watching it on my TV, or I think even on my computer, there would be times where you would just be getting the subtitles for one or the other. You wouldn't be getting both. It wasn't until I watched it on my tablet that I was able to get both subtitles at the same time. And so you'd get I guess super titles, I think they call them when they're at the top of the screen, would be for the readout. So you'd see, this ship and this ship, or this is what's being, whatever it was that was the text that was on the screen. And then at the bottom, you would get the dialogue. So there's all this information going on, and it doesn't go that slowly. So that's another reason why it was a little hard to pick up on stuff the first time around. And honestly, there would be times because the first time through, I only watched it, I think, on the television. And there would be times where the subtitle would just be something that was on the screen. In other words, the text that was on the screen, but people would be talking and there would be no subtitle for that. So if you prefer dubbed, maybe that's the way to go with something like this. So like I said, that first episode ended with them encountering this Gauna, and then the second episode begins with them dealing with the Gauna, and one of these pilots gets killed. Tanikaze manages to, he does some interesting stuff, some maneuvers with this ship, which is called the Sugimori, which impresses people, and so then they go back to, they manage to evade, I can't remember exactly how it happened, so they manage to evade the Gauna, and they go back to Sidonia, and at that point he meets the pilots who are considered to be the top squad. These are the best the best of the best. And that's in the second episode. And at the same time, you're seeing other characters being introduced. There's a few women who are interested in him. Most of whom are pilots or cadet pilots. There is Izana Shinatose, who actually is not a woman. This is a genderless person who was, I guess they have developed, this is somebody who is genderless, but who will accept one gender or the other at a certain point in their life, or at least that's as fully as I've heard it explained. So she can be, I'm saying she, because this person seems more feminine, I guess in part because this person is interested in Tanikaze in what seems like more than just a friendly way, but it's not completely clear. Let's see, let me look at my notes here. But it definitely tends towards the female. Now, another character who is female is Shizuka Hoshijiro. Hoshijiro? And she is a pilot also. Both of them are pilots. And she is part of the squad that Tanikaze is part of. And she definitely, there's definitely a romantic interest there, I think, on her part. You have there's another girl named Yuhata Midorikawa. I think all of these are supposed to be about the same age as him. They're all in their late teens. And she's a cadet who eventually gets promoted to a cadet pilot, in other words, who eventually gets promoted to another position. But I don't think that's in these first 4 episodes. And then also in I guess in the first episode, the second episode, you get introduced to a guy who becomes a rival of Tanikaze, and that is Norio Kunato. And he was the top cadet before Tanikaze shows up. And Kunato, in that second episode, when the elite squad, the top squad of pilots, comes to visit Tanikaze, Kunato is very insulted because he's right nearby and he thinks they're coming to see him because he thinks he's the best cadet, and so that they should be coming to see him, and he gets very insulted. And at one point he gets into a fist fight, not right then, but a little later on, with Tanikaze. Actually, when Tanikaze is defending Izana, and it's so that's that's some of the characters and some of the development that you've got going on there. And there's some interesting things that happen to these characters over the course of the series. In the third episode, the Gauna returns, Gauna 487. As I said, I can't remember exactly how I think they changed position or they changed course and it didn't manage to follow them, but then it shows up again. So the top squad is sent out to take on this Gauna, and the top squad, it ends tragically with the top squad all being killed. Now, one of the things that they use to kill these, to fight the Gaunas, is this weapon called a kabazashi, which is kind of like a lance or a spear. Now they only had one in the squad, and while they were all killed, that lance is still floating out there in space. And so another squad, which is the squad that Tanikaze is part of, is sent out there to get this lance. And at first things go very wrong. It doesn't look good for them. The Gauna fires some sort of weapon that immobilizes 3 of the members of the squad. But because Tanikaze is piloting this Sugimori, which is this older ship, it isn't affected by this weapon, and he's still able to fight. He's told to grab the other people, the other giant robos, and try and get back to Sidonia. But instead, he grabs the kabazashi, this giant lance or spear, and he takes on the Gauna, and he actually kills it. He destroys it, and it's kind of just, its particles are kind of scattered, so it's just completely destroyed. Now, in the course of the fight, what's her name? Hoshijiro who's also, as I think I mentioned before, is part of the same squad as Tanikaze. Her ship is badly damaged, and so she ejects, and her escape pod is kind of floating off into space while this is happening. And so Tanikaze is told to head back to Sidonia. Instead, he takes off after Hoshijiro. And that's where this episode ends. So that's where the fourth episode ends. So I think it's a great show. I'm really enjoying it. I am almost done watching the first season for the second time. But I wanted to keep this short. I wanted to talk about, there's other elements of this I have not discussed. There are secrets that are revealed, especially in the 8th episode. Almost the entire 8th episode is kind of a flashback to decades before, and you get to see a lot of back information about what happened before, but I'm not going to get into that right now. But there's one other character I want to mention who's kind of interesting, kind of different, because all these characters are human, but this one character who is not human is Lala Hiyama. And Lala is a bear. Now, I'm not sure exactly what the story is behind this character. At the point the story begins, she's a cook, although later on you learn more about her past. She's a bear, although she has a robotic, one of the hands is not a paw, but is robotic. And like a black bear or a brown bear or something, or a grizzly. I don't know which kind of bear it is exactly, but she's big, tall, like, 8 or 9 feet tall. And but she's a cook at this point, and so that's something that's a little different. And the other thing that you'll notice in watching these first 4 episodes is that there's a lot of characters who look identical, and I think it was revealed in these first 4 episodes that there's a lot of these characters are clones, and some of these people will look almost exactly like their ancestors, and which I guess isn't unusual in a cartoon. But so there's definitely more than meets the eye here. Another thing that is going on here is that in an effort to maintain humanity, they have actually bioengineered people so they don't need to eat as much, and so that they can actually absorb the energy they need through photosynthesis, like plants do. So all they need is sunlight. Well, it's not all they need, but they can get a lot of the energy they need from sunlight rather than from eating. Although Tanikaze, because I don't know if it's because he was hidden by his grandfather or what the story is exactly, but he still needs to eat considerably, like a regular human does, unlike all these other people do. And he cannot absorb energy through photosynthesis. So I think that's about it. the next two episodes of Knights of Sidonia each have, these are episodes 5 and 6, each kind of have their own character. Episode 5 has, well, the focus is one thing, but there's also another element in there, and I'll get into this, but the primary focus is what the title mentions, and the title is Adrift. The previous episode ended with Tanikaze destroying Gauna 487 and then taking off after Hoshijiro. She was in an escape pod. She was one of the other pilots who was fighting the Gauna, part of his squad of four giant robos, or guards as they call them. Although I think in the subtitles they spell it G-A-R-D, no U. And her guard had been damaged too badly, and so she had to eject. And so she's in this tiny life pod that goes off into space in the middle of this battle, so nobody can help her out because they're too focused on fighting the Gauna. And so he goes off after her after the Gauna has been destroyed. But at the same time, he leaves behind the other two members of his squad, both of whom their guards, their giant robos have been damaged to the point where they are basically incapacitated. And the other thing is that he doesn't have enough power to go out after her and get back. But he does anyway. He plots a course. He takes off after Hoshijiro, and leaving behind Kunato and En, the other two members of their squad. And he reaches Hoshijiro, but he's out of power. There's backup power to run the life support and things like that, but there isn't enough power for them to get back to Sidonia. So they're stuck out there in space, adrift, as the title implies. But what he is able to do is he deploys these solar, kind of like a sail, but it's kind of like a solar panel to absorb energy, I guess, light. And the idea is to recharge the battery that way, although over time it turns out that it's going way too slowly for them to get enough energy to power the ship enough for them to get back to Sidonia. They do have food, but they find out that the food supply is fairly low. They have more water than they have food. They have a couple weeks, or I think it's actually 60 days worth of water, or something like that is what the readout says, but only something like 8 days worth of food. So, so the water supply seems adequate, but the food supply, well, at least for the moment, it seems adequate. They're hoping that they can recharge the batteries within that time. Now so anyway, meanwhile, back on Sidonia, you get two things. First off, and this is the other aspect of the episode that I was talking about. So you get this adrift, and then you get the history. And so you get a little bit of history of Sidonia here. Now, the present is the year 3394. I had to look that up online because I couldn't pick that up in this episode, and if they mentioned it in a previous one, it went right past me. But the present is 3394, but we do see Izana, who was that one of Hoshijiro's, because Hoshijiro and Tanikaze are both cadet pilots at this point. They're not they have not been promoted to pilot level at this point. And another cadet is Izana, who is this person who is kind of neither male nor female, and I'm not sure what the exact word to describe that would be. And I mean biologically, Izana is neither male nor female, but will decide at some point which to become. And they don't really describe it too much more than that. But she, and I'm going to say she because the voice is a female voice, and the voice actress is female, and they frequently refer to Izana in the female, using female pronouns. She is in class, and they are talking about the past, and a couple pieces of information that come up are that Sidonia left Earth in the year 2384, so basically 1,000 years before. And and that in August of 2384, and that the last contact with another ship, with another human ship, with other humans, was in February of 2691. So that would be about 300 years after that, so about 700 years ago. So that's one piece you get of history. The other thing you see is a confrontation between Hiyama, who is that bear character, and the female bear that runs this cafe, which nobody seems to go to except for Tanikaze, because everybody else can photosynthesize. And she clashes with Kobayashi, Captain Kobayashi, who is the nominal head of this of Sidonia, and Hiyama wants Kobayashi to send a rescue mission after Tanikaze and Hoshijiro, and Kobayashi does not. We learn from this that they are the last two survivors of the strike team, which discovered the Kaba, which is this metal or something like that, or mineral, which they discovered in this spaceship, I believe, of some sort, or space vessel of some sort, not of human make. But they learned that this was able to be used as a weapon against the Gaona, and so these were built into. They used pieces of this, and they built them into the kabazashi, which are these giant spears or lances that are used by the guards, which are of course piloted by the humans. And but there's a limited number of them. And that's part of the reason why in episode 4, the squad includes Tanikaze and Hoshijiro was sent after after the Kabazashi, which was lost by the other squad, which had been killed in episode 3. So you get those little bits of information, both about the past, when the Sidonia left Earth, when the last time they encountered any other humans, and also about the Kaba and the Kabazashi. And then it flashes. Then the scene shifts back to the Sugimori, which is the name of Tanikaze's guard, which is, of course, a Mark 17 as compared to the Mark 18, which is the newer version, which is what most of the pilots, in fact, probably all the other pilots are flying the 18s. So back at the Sugimori, food is running out, water's running out, faster than they think they are. There is a scene where you get where Hoshijiro photosynthesizes. Now, Tanikaze is asleep, so she takes off her clothes because she needs to expose her skin to the light in order to photosynthesize, and he wakes up and he realizes that she's in there naked, and because they're both in the same compartment, it's not tiny, they're not right slammed up against each other, but they are, it's a relatively small room. And so there's a lot of blushing in this episode between Hoshijiro and Tanikaze. You get a lot of, it's apparent from prior episodes that she has some romantic interest in him. He seems to be a bit oblivious towards it, but nevertheless, there is a certain amount of blushing on his part as well. So the food runs out at this point. They've been out there for over a week. The water runs out. It turns out that the reader, there's some problem with the thing, the meter that indicates how much water is left. And actually then when they go outside the ship to investigate, they find out that there's a hole where the water was coming out. And so they're very low on water. They have almost no water left. But they managed to filter some water, and for a bit there that's enough. But then a rescue team shows up from Sidonia. Some pilots took off. In fact, a huge number of pilots, 256 of them, took off without permission. and went out to rescue and found Hoshijiro and Tanikaze, and that's where this 5th episode ends. So the 6th episode, which is called Salutations, now this one isn't quite as focused. It's a bit more of what I like to think of as an in-betweener. In other words, it's setting things up for future episodes. And so you do get some interesting things in this episode, but not... It's a little harder to say this is what this episode's about because there's lots of little things going on in this episode. So the early part of the episode kind of deals with Tanikaze and Hoshijiro being back at Sidonia. They get back to Sidonia. You see them getting cleaned up. You see them getting checked out medically. She is not in perfect shape, but he is, and that once again gets back to the fact that he doesn't completely understand this at this point, but he heals very quickly. So there's something about him that's different. Then the two of them go and visit the memorial for the Akai Squad. The Akai Squad is the ones that I mentioned before who were killed in Episode 3. These were the top pilots who were sent out to deal with Gauna 487 and were killed by Gauna 487. And then, of course, in Episode 4, their squad, Tanikaze and Hoshijiro's, was sent out to deal with them. And they did kill Gauna 487. And then they go to visit Hiyama's cafe, Hiyama the bear's cafe, where they share a meal, which means a lot more probably to Hiyama, because hardly anybody comes to her cafe, and also to Tanikaze, because unlike everybody else, he can't photosynthesize, and so he needs to eat every day, whereas they don't. Then we get a promotion ceremony, in which Tanikaze, Hoshijiro, Kunato, and En are all promoted. This is the 4 members of this team, of this squad, are promoted to full pilots. They're promoted from cadets to full pilots. And there's a bit of a celebration afterwards. And this is where you get some of these interesting character moments and some more interesting things. Izana is there, and Yuhata is there. And Yuhata, I believe it's her brother, was killed in the first episode, and so she's grateful to... Or was her brother one of the Akai Squad? Now I can't recall. I might have to look that up. But she's coming on very strong to Tanikaze. Hoshijiro is obviously interested in Tanikaze, but she's kind of shy, and she does not come on real strong. Izana is interested in Tanikaze, but also does not come on too strongly. And but Yuhata has no problem being strong. She, on a number of occasions, elbows Izana out of the way. And but then Tanikaze sees Captain Kobayashi, who had been at the ceremony, who had been the one who promoted them, taking off, and he goes running after Captain Kobayashi. He confronts her. Well, he meets with her as she's going down in an elevator to another level, and he starts asking her questions about his grandfather and about the fact that he heals very fast and why she always wears a mask when she's out in public, but when he went to visit her in her office, she didn't wear a mask. You know, what sort of secret is this? What's going on there? And she doesn't really give him any answers. You know. So he returns to the party, at which point Yuhata suggests that now that they're pilots, now that he's a pilot, they can go on a trip to the underwater floating tank, which was shown in episode 2 or 3, and so she wants to get Tanikaze alone in one of these floating pods that float in this huge underwater tank. And so she kind of just wants to go with him, but he suggests that Izana come along, and then they suggest that Hoshijiro comes along, and so the 4 of them go down there, and then this struggle ensues where Yuhata tries to push Tanikaze into one of these pods, and then get in there himself, but Izana tries to get in with them, and a fight ensues between Izana and Yuhata, and then before you know it, they get kicked out, and in the struggle, the door starts to close on them, and they kind of get stuck in the door, and so Hoshijiro tries to help them out, and they get thrown out, and Hoshijiro winds up in the pod with Tanikaze, and before they know it, the door is closed, and Tanikaze and Hoshijiro are once again alone, just like they were in the previous episode, except for this time it's underwater instead of out in space. And so once again, there's more blushing, and but while they're in the pod, a giant, well, they don't think it's just one Gauna, they think it's a cluster of Gaunas, or a nest of Gaunas appears. It's something like 5,000 kilometers long, and so Hoshijiro and Tanikaze, along with a lot of other pilots, are called up to go out on a mission to investigate this thing. But all you see them preparing for this mission, and then what you see is Tanikaze waking up. And he doesn't know what happened. He doesn't have any memory, but people are blaming him. And then he sees on TV that Hoshijiro is dead. And that's where episode 6 ends. One thing I wanted to point out was that I have started, well, I've read the first volume of the manga. I got it on through the Kindle store on Amazon, and it's the same, but it's different. And maybe I'll talk about that a little more the next time I talk about Knights of Sidonia. That's it for episode 93 of Dave Talks Comics. Dave Talks Comics can be found on the web at davetalkscomics.com and facebook.com/DaveTalksComics. On Twitter, at Dave Talks Comics. Email can be sent to davetalkscomics@gmail.com. Next time on Dave Talks Comics, I will be talking about All-Star Squadron issues 29 and 30. I'm Dave. Thank you for listening. Not sure how this is going to work out, but here goes. Knights of Sidonia. No.